So then it's you and me, Vincent. I'd like to introduce Vincent Gouttebarge, one of our own in Amsterdam, a former professional football player himself. He is now one of the researchers within the Amsterdam University Medical Center, within our IOC Research Center. He's also the Chief Medical Officer at FIFPro, taking care of football players worldwide. And he's one of the leading researchers within the IOC consensus on mental health of athletes. So Vincent, the floor is yours, and I'll leave it to you.
Yes, thank you, Evert. I'm going to squeeze my presentation within the last 15 minutes. Obviously, one of the recommendations that we made within the IOC consensus statement was that there was a need to develop assessment tools in order to screen athletes for mental health symptoms and disorders. So it's what we did within the IOC mental health working group. We did develop an assessment and recognition tool in order to identify in early stage elite athlete suffering or likely to suffer from mental health symptoms and disorders. Well, today I'm going to focus on these tools and not on the process of the development of these tools. And if you are interested to read a little bit more information about the process that we did conduct in order to come to these tools, then I refer to you to the article that was published in September within the British Journal of Sport Medicine. And within the manuscript, you can also find the developed tools. So we did develop the IOC Sport Mental Health Assessment Tool and the Sport Mental Health Recognition Tool. Well, for those that are familiar with the SCAT, the Sport Concussion Assessment Tool, then you recognize a little bit the distinction between the assessment tool and the recognition tool. The assessment tool is developed principally for sport medicine physicians and other licensed and registered health professionals. By contrast, the recognition tool is obviously available for athletes and all members of the athlete entourage. So if we look first at the recognition tool, it's quite a straightforward tool. It's one page of information. It can be used by athlete coaches and obviously family members and all other members within the athlete entourage that are perhaps not medically educated. The recognition tool is developed in three main sections. The first section presents some information about what is mental health symptoms and disorders, and we divided this section in thoughts, feelings, action, and physical change. The second section, it's not easy to miss it. It's the red flags in the red box. And obviously, one of the red flags where you have to take immediate action is when an athlete is talking about doing self-harm or harming other within his or her entourage. And the last section is actually what you have to do when you are exposed to an athlete who is reporting some mental health symptoms, but it also explains what you have to do yourself if you are reporting some mental health symptoms. So it's quite straightforward, one page, it's a recognition tool, nothing very complicated. And again, it is very key information that should be given to athlete and all members of the athlete entourage. So now we move forward to the IOC Sport Mental Health Assessment Tool. So you rely on your medical form as a sport medicine physician or health professional. You have a medical form on 3 pages. And you also have 3 forms that can be completed by the athlete form 1, 2, and 3. And why 3 athlete form? Well, it's because as a working group, we did develop the sport mental health assessment tool based on a 3-step approach. The first step is a triage step, and therefore you rely on the information provided by the athlete on the form 1. The step 2 is a more extensive screening step, and you rely on the information given by the athlete on form 2. And the step 3 is a step of intervention, of reflection, of clinical assessment on defining your management plan. And if you need some more information, you might want to ask your athlete to fill in the athlete form 3. So in the next minute, I'm just going to spend a little bit more minute on each of these 3 steps. So again, the first step is a triage step, and therefore you rely on the athlete form 1, and the athlete form 1 include an existing validated screening instrument that assess sport-related psychological distress. So you have the athlete form 1, you ask your athlete to fill in this questionnaire, 10 items. Based on the answer of each item, you can calculate a total score. Obviously, the total score, you can write it down on your medical form. And depending on the total score, then the athlete is below the threshold or at or above the threshold. Well, if the athlete total score is below the cutoff value, then there is no action needed. And if the athlete is at or above the cutoff value, then you go to step 2. The step 2 is an extensive screening step. Therefore, you rely on the information provided on the athlete form 2. And within this athlete form 2, you can find 6 existing validated screening instruments that assess mental health symptoms that are the most prevalent within the context of elite sport. So the athlete form 2 is based on 3 pages, 6 different validated screening instruments, as I just mentioned, that explore 6 different constructs, namely anxiety, depression, sleep disturbance, alcohol misuse, drug misuse, and finally disordered eating. Of course, as a professional, you still rely on your medical form on the first 2 pages in particular. You ask your athlete to complete the 6 screening instruments on the athlete form 2. For each of these screening instruments, you can calculate a total score. You can write down the total score on the first page of your medical form. You can transcribe all the information on your summary table on page 2 of your medical form. And for each of the 6 screening instruments, you, of course, have the cutoff value available. If all the 6 instruments are below the cutoff values, then you go to step 3A. And if one or more of these 6 instruments are at or above the cutoff value, then you go to step 3B. There is one particular circumstance and one particular item within the instrument for depression. It's item number 9. If the box is ticked by the athlete on item 9 of the depression instrument, then you need to take immediate action, because this item reflects to potential thought of your athlete to commit suicide or to harm someone else. So obviously, there is no time to waste and you need to take immediate action. So the step 3A, again, if all 6 screening instruments are below the cutoff value in step 2, then obviously you can offer your athlete some brief intervention, such as psychoeducation. We heard from Caroline and Abhinav that education is very important, so you can offer him or her some education about mental health symptoms and disorders. You can offer some soft intervention, such as meditation or mindfulness or mental skill training. Obviously, you keep monitoring your athlete, and therefore you can use the athlete form 1 that assess sport psychological distress. If one or more of the screening instrument assessed in step 2 is positive, then you need to conduct a clinical assessment. And within your clinical assessment, you focus especially on the severity, complexity, the diagnostic uncertainty of the construct that was screened positive, and you look as well whether your athlete perhaps was non-responsive to a previous treatment. Within your medical form, we have tables where you can write down your findings. And there is, of course, a lot of instruction that help the medical professional in order to answer the question with regard to the severity, for instance, and complexity of the condition. If you think that during your clinical assessment you are missing some information about perhaps other constructs related to mental health symptoms and disorders, obviously you can use the Athlete Form 3, where you can find some existing validated screening instrument for other constructs. And obviously there is also some instruction within the medical form for the cutoff value for each screening instrument. So based on your clinical assessment and also on all information gathered in step 1 and step 2, eventually information provided by Athlete Form 3, then you need to define your management plan. Therefore, you can, of course, refer to the IOC consensus statement that was presented by Claudia Reardon, extensive document where you can find a lot of guidance in order to manage an athlete with mental health symptoms and disorders. If you feel insecure, or if you feel that perhaps a colleague professional could assist you or help you in managing your athlete, obviously you can refer him or her to a clinical psychologist or to a sport psychiatrist. I mean, there is no shame to say that a particular case is difficult and complicated, and there is no shame to refer an athlete to a colleague who has a little bit more extensive knowledge when it comes to mental health symptoms and disorders. So we believe that the IOC Sport Mental Health Assessment tool is the way to go in the future, especially when you see the ease of the 3-step approach that we did selected. The triage step and the extensive screening step can be embedded in any existing and secure online platform that generally already use within the context of elite sport. We believe that the IOC SMART should be used at least in the pre-competition period, but ideally also within the mid and end season period in order to monitor the mental health symptoms and disorders of elite athletes. And the SMART should definitely be used when any significant event occur within the life of an athlete. And obviously within elite sport, a significant event is an injury, is an illness that lead to a long-term period without training and competition, a surgery as well. Unexplained performance concern is also something, of course, always stressful for any athlete. And you also have the adverse life event that occur outside the athletic environment of the athlete that needs to be monitored, and that might trigger the use of the SMART within an athlete. So to sum up, the SMART 3-step approach, you rely on your medical form and 3 athlete forms. In the step 1, obviously the athlete completes the Athlete Form 1. You can use a medical form to decide whether someone is above or below the cutoff value. There is no action needed if the athlete is negative on the Athlete Form 1. If positive, then you go to step 2. For step 2, you rely on the Athlete Form 2. 6 screening instruments are completed. And if none of them is positive, then you go to step 3A. If one or more is positive, then you go to step 3B. Step 3A is a synonym to a brief intervention and keeping monitoring your athlete when it comes to his or her mental health symptoms and disorders. Step 3B is synonym of a clinical assessment where you need to gather all information needed in order to define your management plan, and you might want to consider to refer your athlete to a clinical psychologist or psychiatrist, and you might want to consider to gather additional information by using the Athlete Form 3. So the SMART and also the SMART, so the assessment tool and the recognition tool, is only the first version. So it's not a gold standard. It's neither the silver standard right now. We strongly believe that both tools will be susceptible to be updated, and the quality might be increased in the future. It's the same process that we did have with the SCAT, the Sport Concussion Assessment Tool, which is nowadays the SCAT-5. So it's our intention as a mental health working group of the IOC to increase the quality of the SMART and the SMART in the future. And that was all. I think I'm just in time for perhaps taking one or two questions.
Thank you, Vincent. Really interesting presentation, really interesting tools as well. I think well needed. And also, if I look at the chat, there are some questions about these tools. I think one question that keeps popping up, if there's any information or data on the validity of these tools.
Yes, as I mentioned, obviously, I didn't want to spend too much time on the process that we went through in order to develop the tool. We did conduct many scientific approaches in order to come to the SMART, and one of them was obviously to look at the reliability and the validity of the tool. So yes, we have data. It was actually conducted within the context of professional football. We also look whether the tool was well received among sport medicine physicians working within the context of elite sports. So a lot of processes are described within the manuscript published and freely available within the British Journal of Sport Medicine.
Okay, so likely some of these questions will be solved when people
yes, but obviously in the future, I definitely encourage research groups to focus on the reliability and the validity of the SMART. You know, as the SCAT, we want to make it even better in the future. Yeah, I welcome all exercises that are looking at the reliability and the validity of the SMART.
Okay. Here's another question that a couple of people asked, if there's any experiences or feedback already from athletes.
Not yet. Not yet. I must say that the SMART, we try to implement it within sport context in Canada and the USA, which is already ongoing. So we might get some feedback in the future. You can imagine it was published only in September, 6 weeks ago, and available 6 weeks ago. So I think it's not fair to expect to have some feedback already right now. Within the mental health working group, obviously, we did include the feedback of athletes in the development of the tool, because some athlete and former athlete are included within our working group. And within my sport, professional football, I will strive to include the SMART as a standard screening instrument for all professional footballers across the globe. Last thing that I perhaps want to mention, if you are interested to be educated how to use the SMART, or perhaps about the whole spectrum of mental health symptoms and disorders, I want to mention that the IOC did develop a diploma and a certificate on mental health in elite sport, and it is available through the Sport Oracle website. So I think everyone who wants to be educated specifically on such topic can refer to the IOC programs.
Okay. I think two more quick questions. Here's one question that maybe also relate to the previous speaker, and a question there. Is this tool solely for athletes, or might it also be used for coaches or other staff members?
No, it was developed principally for athletes. That does not mean that the existing screening instrument that we did select and that are validated, they are likely to not be sport specific, and that might be also applicable to coach, but it was principally developed for elite athlete. And as mentioned in the previous talk of Alan, obviously a coach and all other member and entourage are very important, and we need to focus on them as well in the future.
Okay. And finally, not so much a question, but I think more a remark from Neil Clark that maybe this could also be a useful tool to measure transitions throughout an athlete's career. So instead of a screening tool, or maybe also have it as a monitoring tool. potentially something to look at in the future.
Yeah, good idea.